والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين وبعد. So we continue with our next session of Monday Night Boost, and tonight, inshallah ta'ala, we'll be speaking about something that's very important for us to understand as Muslims, and that is the role of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in our lives. Right? We live in a time where there's so many different ways of life. Right? There's so many different philosophies of life. You have liberalism. You have secularism, you have, people that don't follow any religion at all. They're secularists. You have some people that are, that are Christians, Jews, Muslims, and depending on where you fall within these groups and within these categories and these ideologies, it's going to affect greatly the beliefs that you have, and the way that you actually practice your life and the way that you live, right? The things that you do, the people that you associate with, right? The people that you consider, your friends and foes and things like that, right? It's gonna greatly change and differ depending on where you go, and what you believe in. Now, we as Muslims, obviously, all of us sitting here today, alhamdulillah, we're Muslims, inshallah. And being Muslims, we have to understand that as a Muslim, there are certain beliefs that we have that are very opposed to every other belief system or ideology, right? We have a very specific way of looking at the world, right? And today, inshallah ta'ala, we'll be talking about, first and foremost, I'm going to be mentioning many verses of the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the role of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam in our lives. Right? You have a lot of Muslims that they don't really understand what it means to be a Muslim. So what you find is that you have a lot of people that they're brought up as Muslims, right? They have Muslim names, they eat, food that the Muslims eat, they have, like an Islamic culture. You have a lot of women, perhaps they wear the hijab, and the only reason why they're wearing it is because their parents brought them up like that, right? And, this may be very easy if you're coming from a background like, you're coming from Pakistan or Bangladesh, and you've been raised as a Muslim there. When you come here, it's very hard to break away from what you've been brought up on. Right, it's very hard. And a lot of the times what you find is that you have parents who move to this country, they come to New York City from Bangladesh, they come to New York City from Pakistan or Guyana, wherever they're from, and they come with the cultural Islam, and they themselves may not even understand what it means to be a Muslim. Now what happens is that they have children here, right, and they're going to try to use the same approach, the same strict approach that was used on them when they were younger. They try to use that same strict approach on their kids. Right? Without actually explaining to them what Islam means, why should you practice Islam? Why should you be a Muslim? And that's why most kids nowadays, kids that are raised as Muslims, if you ask them why you're Muslim, they're going to say, oh, because my parents raised me as Muslim. The same answer that a Christian kid would answer with. He's going to say, I'm a Christian because my parents raised me as Christian. Right? It's not common that you find young kids and teenagers actually being like, what, Islam makes the most sense to me. Right? Islam makes the most sense to me, and I could see the flaws of every other way of life, and Islam makes the most sense. Right? Very rarely you find that, and it's very important that we as adults, those of you who have kids, that you learn. Sometimes it's not enough to force your kids to wear the hijab and force your kids to pray. That's not going to be enough. Maybe it was enough for you back home, but it's not enough for the kids nowadays who are being bombarded with different ideas, with atheism, secularism, liberalism. A lot of people that they're not even Muslims in their ideology, in their thinking, right? Even though they may have a beard, they may wear hijab, but in their aqeedah, in their belief, if you actually look at what they believe in, they're not a Muslim inside, right? They don't meet the minimum requirements of what a Muslim should believe in. And we're not saying that you should go around saying to people that you're a kafir and this one is a non-Muslim. No. But it's to reflect upon ourselves. Right? Are we meeting the standards that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set for us? Now we have to understand that in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not just enough to say that you believe in Allah and then that's it. Right? A lot of people, they think that to be a Muslim, it means to just believe in the existence of Allah. People that say, oh, I believe in God. Right? And what they intend when they say I believe in God is I believe in the existence of God. Right? Somebody give me an evidence to show that it's not sufficient to just believe in the existence of God. Somebody give me an example of that to show how it's not enough to know that Allah exists. Because a lot of people, they say, I know God exists, I believe in God, so then I'm fine. I don't have to do anything after that. Give me an example, or give me a hadith, or give me a verse of the Quran that disproves that point. Because I'm telling you, there's a lot of people that have that mindset. right? They say, I could do whatever I want. I could celebrate whatever I want. I could live my life however I want. But as long as I say that I'm a Muslim, my name is Muhammad or Fatima, whatever my name is, I believe in the existence of Allah, and then that's fine. Why is that wrong? Yeah.
Even mushrikin believe in Allah, right?
Exactly. The mushrikun during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? The polytheists, those who the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he took these people as his enemies. These people fought against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would say about many of them that they're going to be in the fire, right? For example, after the Battle of Badr, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke to those those enemies that were fighting against him. Right? And he said to them that, did you find what your Lord has, promised you as true, and things like this. So it's very important to understand that the mushrikun during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah, He says, وَلَئِن سَأَلْتَهُم مَّنْ خَلَقَهُم لَيَقُولُونَ اللَّهِ. If you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, were to ask them, we're talking about Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab, we're talking about these enemies of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the mushrikun, Quraysh. If you were to ask them who created them, لَيَقُولُونَ اللَّهِ. They would say that Allah created them. So they had no doubt. They had no doubt at all, considering the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created them. They knew that with certainty. None of them ever denied that. But what was the actual problem? Their problem was that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not only did he want them to admit that Allah created them, but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he came with a message that that entailed that they would only worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what the problem was. And a lot of us today, we say that Allah created me. We say that Allah has given me my sight and my hearing and all of these blessings. We admit that, just as the mushrikun did. And a lot of us, we say that that's enough. And we worship money. We worship this ism and that ism. And obviously that's a huge problem. Right? Like if it was a problem for the mushrikun who accepted Allah as their God, but at the same time they worship other things, it's going to be a problem for us as well. Right? Excellent, right? What else? What else, right? What else can we mention to those who have this type of mindset that, if I believe that God exists, and I believe that God is there, then that's fine for me. I can do whatever I want. Why is that not enough? What else can we say? Yeah. Yasin.
So even though we do believe that obviously our first and foremost thing is that we believe that amantu billahi wa kitabihi wa rusulihi, right? We believe in the things, but I think what surah stands out for me is Surah Ankabut, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about that we will test you in money. Well, he'll test you in specific things. So it's not just because a lot of people, they believe that as long as I believe in God, then that's and they expect everything to be like happy, happy dandy, like nothing's gonna happen. But to be a Muslim is also, you have to realize that you're going to face through these trials and tests as well. Absolutely. So I believe that especially in Surah Ankabut, Allah mentions that we'll test you in hunger, we'll test you in all these different types of aspects. So that's also a requirement that you have to go through a trial, and that's also part of being
absolutely
Muslim as
that
well.
You're going to have to deal with some tests during in this life, and you have to pass those tests. You have to deal with the things that come at you as a believer in the right way, right? Yeah, Abdul Rahman.
In Surah Zariyat, Allah says He only created you and jinn to worship Him.
Excellent, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. The only reason why I have created the jinn and the human beings is to worship me. Right? So you actually need to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not just say that you believe in Him. And that you believe that He exists. Right? Part of your iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to actually submit to Him. That's what Islam means. Right? Like it means to submit to Allah Azza wa Jal. And if you look at Iblis, Iblis, he knows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. He has no doubt about that. Iblis knows Allah exists. Right? Don't ever think that the devil, shaitan, does not think that Allah exists. He knows that for a fact. He had a conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? He actually spoke to Allah Azza wa Jal. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him that he's gonna be, in the fire, and that he's gonna be punished. Iblis, he says, "Oh Allah, give me some time." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him some time. So he actually made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah Azza wa Jal addressed him directly. So Iblis knows for a fact that Allah exists, but at the same time Allah called him, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he was from the kafirin, from the disbelievers. So this belief is not just, rejecting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence. This belief is also refusing to submit. And that's what Iblis' problem was. Right? So now, let's just mention some verses from the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala where Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us about the standards of belief and what we should, what our perspective towards the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam should be specifically. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in a verse in Surah An-Nisa, Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says, فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by Himself. Now there's certain verses in the Quran where Allah Azza wa Jalla speaks to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam directly. And sometimes we are not being addressed by that, right? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is being addressed only. For example, Allah He says that إِنَّا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ بِالْحَقِّ. Indeed, we have sent you with the truth. Obviously, that, by extension, of course, if we're, like calling the people towards the truth, then we're being addressed there. But primarily, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is being addressed with verses like this. Among those verses is a verse in Surah An-Nisa. Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says, فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Allah says to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that by your Lord, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the people, your followers, Quraysh, the Muslims, all of them, they will not believe. They will not believe. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to mention the prerequisite, the condition of belief. Allah Azza wa Jalla says that they will not believe حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُكَ فِي مَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُم, until they make you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a judge in all of the things that come up in their lives. So they will not, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about all of us, that we will not believe until we make Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam a judge in all of our affairs. Right? So how many of us have that mentality that we are looking for guidance from the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in whatever matters we have in our lives? Right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly, He clearly mentions that they will not believe until they make you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a judge in all of their matters. Not only that, ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَرَجًا مِمَّا قَضَيْتَ وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. Not only do they make you a judge in all of their matters, but they don't find any problems within their hearts. They don't find any difficulty in accepting what you have commanded, and they submit to that fully. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly sets the bar as to what is expected of us as believers. And you have many verses in the Quran where Allah Azza wa Jal, constantly throughout the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَأَطِيعُ اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُ الرَّسُولِ, and obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obey the messenger. وَمَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. Whatever the messenger has given you, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, then take him. Whatever he has forbidden you from, then stay away from him. Allah He says, مَن يُطِعِ الرَّسُولَ فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهِ. Whoever disobeys the messenger has disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah Azza wa Jal makes it very clear in the Quran that مَن يُطِعِ الرَّسُولَ فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهِ. Whoever has obeyed the messenger has obeyed Allah. So we as Muslims, when it comes to obeying the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we only obey him because he's a messenger. We don't obey him because he's a man. We don't obey him for any other reason than the fact that he's a messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says in the Quran that وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى. He doesn't speak from his own desires. Right? So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he commands us with something, it's not just from his own self. Right? Allah Azza wa Jalla says, إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَى. It's only revelation that's been inspired to him. Right? So that differentiates him from every other human being, as opposed to the prophets and the messengers. But besides the prophets and the messengers, nobody else receives revelation the way that they did. So when it comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and other people, we have to realize that he is the one that we have to put in front of everybody in terms of what he commands us, in terms of what he teaches us. Right? And that's why Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says that يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تُقَدِّمُوا بَيْنَ يَدَيِ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. O you who believe, do not put anything in front of Allah and His messenger. Right? Very clear verse in the Quran. Now, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have to realize that it's a rahmah of Allah Azza wa Jalla that He has sent him to us. Right? Imagine if we had no Islam, we had no guidance. Imagine how lost we'd be. Right? We'll be doing whatever we want, following our desires, taking our desires as a God. And there's a verse that the Imam he recited in Salat al-Maghrib. The second rak'ah, the Imam he recited a verse from the end of Surah At-Tawbah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ, that there has come to you a messenger from your own selves. Right? لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ, that whatever hurts you, whatever difficulties you go through, it hurts him as well. Right? It hurts him as well. عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ, that He's diligent to give you and to teach you whatever is good for you, whatever is beneficial for you. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Ra'ufur Rahim, that he is kind and he's merciful. So this is why you find that there are many, ahadith with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he would say that I would wish that I meet my brothers. I would wish that I meet my brothers. Now the other Sahaba around, they're like, O Messenger of Allah, aren't we your brothers? And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, my brothers are those who will come after me, that they have never seen me, but they will believe in me and follow me. Right? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from among these people. Ameen. So in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear that the Prophet ﷺ, that he's an authority for us in terms of what he commands and what he forbids. Right? And there's a very beautiful hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, he says that man ata'ani faqad ata'a Allah. Whoever obeys me has obeyed Allah. وَمَنْ عَصَانِي فَقَدْ عَصَى اللَّهِ. And whoever has disobeyed me has in fact disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this completely changes your mindset every time you hear a statement of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? It's very different now. You may think that, oh, he's just a man, that I don't need to follow him. And this is why you find today that there are people that they call themselves Quranists. They only want to follow the Quran. Right? They say, oh, the books of hadith that, they've been made up. They've been compiled only like 150 years after his death, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They're fabricated and blah, blah, blah. Right? So you find that there are some people that they reject the sunnah completely. And there's a very beautiful hadith, right? There's a very beautiful hadith in the, recorded by Imam al-Tabarani, an Abi Dharr. It's been narrated by Abu Dharr radiyallahu anhu. Now, Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, he says that لَقَدْ تَرَكَنَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم وَمَا يُحَرِّكُ طَائِرٌ جَنَاحَيْهِ فِي السَّمَاءِ إِلَّا ذَكَّرَنَا مِنْهُ عِلْمًا. Abu Dharr, he says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he left us. And there was no bird in the sky that would fly in the sky, that would flap its wings, except that the Prophet ﷺ told us something about that bird. Can you think about this? Almost everything the Prophet ﷺ gave them some guidance about. Even the birds that are flying in the sky. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ, that he changed their whole worldview. The way that they looked at the world changed completely when he came to them. Right? And then he quotes the Prophet ﷺ. He says that the Prophet ﷺ said that مَا بَقِيَ شَيْءٌ يُقَرِّبُ مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ وَيُبَاعِدُ مِنَ النَّارِ إِلَّا وَقَدْ بُيِّنَ لَكُمْ. The Prophet ﷺ, he's quoted to have said by Abu Dharr. Abu Dharr, he said that the Prophet ﷺ said that there's nothing that's going to bring you closer to Jannah and further away from the fire except that it's been clarified to you. Right? So whatever is good for us, the Prophet ﷺ has clarified it for us. Whatever is bad, he's warned us from it. Right? So that, having that mentality as a Muslim is very important, especially in our times. We have so many, so many different philosophies, so many different ways of life. But as a Muslim, Islam is not just something that you say. It's something you practice. It's a complete way of life. Right? And that's why we as Muslims, we have guidance when it comes to how we eat, how we sleep, how we use the bathroom, how we dress. Almost every single thing that has to do with your daily life as a Muslim, there's some guidance. Right? There's some guidance. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He did not just leave us blindly to wander around in this world. Now, something that's also very important to understand is that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were some people that claimed that they were believers. Right? They were munafiqun. Now somebody explain to me what was the motive behind these people claiming that they were Muslims. But before you answer this question, we have to understand that the munafiqun, those people that would claim that they're Muslims but they're not really Muslims, they only did so in the period of Medina. For example, the Prophet ﷺ, he spent about 13 years in Mecca, and when he moved to Medina, that's when all of a sudden you have some of these people would accept Islam, but it would be a fake Islam. It wouldn't be real. My question is, why would they do that? What was the wisdom, behind them doing that? Whereas in the Meccan period, there was almost no munafiqun. We don't know of any of the munafiqeen in the Meccan period. But why in the Medinan period? Why are there so many, people that were hypocrites, that were disbelievers inside? Yeah. Was the mic? Just pass it in the back.
Well, in the Meccan period, they were being tortured, and there's no point being a fake Muslim because you'll just be tortured.
Exactly,
for
right?
No reason.
In the Meccan period, they were being tortured. If you were a believer, then you would be persecuted in the Meccan phase. So in the first 13 years of prophethood, the believers who claimed that they were Muslims, they were persecuted. Some of them were killed. Some of them they were beaten. They were tortured. Their money was taken away from them. Their wealth was stolen from them. So in a time of persecution, when it's a disadvantage to be a Muslim, then only those who are actually sincere would be Muslims. Now, in the Medinan period, when the Muslims had authority, when they had power, then you would have some people, they would accept Islam only to benefit from that power. right? And they would not actually be believers inside. They would actually be kuffar inside. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us the attitude of the munafiqun, of the hypocrites, when they were called towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam to judge between them. In Surah An-Nur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's almost like a half of a page where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the munafiqun and their mindset. Right? Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says that وَيَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَبِالرَّسُولِ. And the munafiqun, the hypocrites, they say that we believe in Allah and the Messenger. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَبِالرَّسُولِ وَأَطَعْنَا. And we have obeyed. Right? ثُمَّ يَتَوَلَّى فَرِيقٌ مِّنْهُم مِّن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ وَمَا أُولَٰئِكَ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that after they say their statements, after they say that we have believed in Allah and the Messenger and we have obeyed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that they turn away and they're not really believers. Right? They're not really believers. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He then says, وَإِذَا دُعُوا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ لِيَحْكُمَ بَيْنَهُم. When they are called to Allah and His Messenger, for the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to judge in their matters, sometimes they would have a dispute. And when it will be said to these munafiqun during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, to come to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam so he can settle our matter. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, إِذَا فَرِيقٌ مِّنْهُمْ مُعْرِضُونَ. All of a sudden you find that there's a group from them, they turn away. But at the beginning they were claiming that they were Muslims, that we believe in Allah and the Messenger. Right? Perhaps you have many people that they have the same mindset. Why? Because it's just a cultural Islam, that's all it is. It's just a name that they have. It's just the name Muhammad, that's basically it. Right? It's just the food that the Muslims eat, that's pretty much the only attachment that we have to Islam for some people. Right? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection. And then Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions, وَإِن يَكُنْ لَهُمُ الْحَقُّ يَأْتُوا إِلَيْهِ مُذْعِنِينَ. And if there's some advantage for them, that's when they're going to come. Right? When it suits their desires, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he wants to give them a ruling that's going to suit them, that's when they submit. That's when they say, you know what, fine, we'll come, we obey Allah and His Messenger now. Right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He asks a question. Allah Azza wa Jal, He then says, أَفِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ أَمْ ارْتَابُوا أَمْ يَخَافُونَ أَنْ يَحِيفَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ وَرَسُولُهُ بَلْ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. That do they have any doubt in their hearts? Right? Do they have any sickness in their hearts? Or are they afraid that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that they will be unjust to them? Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ, that they are the wrongdoers. Right? They are actually the wrongdoers. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that إِنَّمَا كَانَ قَوْلَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, that it is only the statement of the believers, the true believers. Right? إِذَا دُعُوا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ لِيَحْكُمَ بَيْنَهُمْ أَن يَقُولُوا سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says that it is only the statement of the true believers that when they're called to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger to judge between them, they say سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. We have heard and we have obeyed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that they are the successful ones. Right? So just think about this, that we have so many different things that we do on a daily basis, whether it's your business, whether it's your school, whether it's how you dress. Do we look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam as the standard in terms of what we want to do? Right? Do we gauge all of our decisions? Do we measure all of our decisions based upon Islam? Right? That's something that's very important. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu dukhulu fi silmi kafa, that you who believe, enter into Islam, into submission totally. Right? So Islam is not just a religion where you say that you're a Muslim and then you want to worship Allah on Sunday or Friday or Saturday or whatever day you choose, right? It's something that is, it's a mindset that you have to have. Right? It's a mindset that you have to have. Now, when it comes to, as I mentioned, that there are some people, they say that how, we're not going to follow the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What's very amazing is that you have some hadiths that have been narrated like over 1,000 years ago that shows the mentality of some people today. Right? So I just want to mention one hadith. It's been narrated by عن المقدام ibn Ma'di Karim radiyallahu anhu, Miqdam radiyallahu anhu. He says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on the day of Khaybar, right, they had a battle, and on the day of Khaybar, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made certain things haram. Right? He declared that certain things were haram. And the Prophet ﷺ, he then addressed the Sahaba. And he told them about something that's going to happen in the future, and it hasn't happened yet. The Prophet ﷺ, he says that يُوشِكُ أَحَدُكُمْ أَن يُكَذِّبَنِي وَهُوَ مُتَّكِئٌ عَلَى أَرِيكَتِهِ يُحَدَّثُ بِحَدِيثِي. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that there's going to come a time where some of the people, they will be given a hadith from my statements. Somebody's going to tell them that, you know what, the Prophet ﷺ, he said something. And they're going to hear the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, and they're going to be chilling on their couches. Right? They're going to be sitting back just chilling. And the Prophet ﷺ, he then says that this person, when a hadith is brought to him, he will then say that بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ كِتَابُ اللَّهِ, that between us and you, whoever is telling him this hadith, he will say to him that between us and you is the book of Allah. Right? That we only follow the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That فَمَا وَجَدْنَاهُ فِيهِ مِنْ حَلَالٍ إِسْتَحْلَلْنَاهُ وَمَا وَجَدْنَا فِيهِ مِنْ حَرَامٍ حَرَّمْنَاهُ. That whatever halal we find in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's what halal is. Whatever we find that's haram in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we deem that as haram. And they will continue to say, they will all, and the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he then says, أَلَا وَإِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ أَلَا وَإِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم مثل ما حرم الله. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said that indeed what the messenger has deemed as haram is the same as what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has deemed as haram. You have so many verses in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Right? So there should be no doubt to us as Muslims that we have to follow the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam today, just as the Sahaba had to follow it back then. Right? And there's a very beautiful hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, he says that أَلَا إِنِّي أُوتِيتُ الْقُرْآنَ وَمِثْلَهُ. I have been given the Quran and that which is similar to it. That's the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. My question to you guys is that we know that we have the Quran. Like the Quran is one book. We have it on our shelves. Many of us, we've memorized many parts of the Quran. It's very clear as to what the Quran is. But what is the sunnah? Where can you find that? Where can you find the sunnah? A lot of people, we understand and we all accept as Muslims that we need to follow the sunnah, but where do you find it? Somebody tell me. Where do you find it? Is it just what Brother Zakareeya says? That's the sunnah. Whatever you hear on the minbar during the khutbah of Jum'ah, that's the sunnah. What exactly is that? Yeah. The books of hadith, what are some of them that you know about?
Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah,
Yeah.
Sahih Bukhari, Nisai or Nisai.
Okay. Listen, so the most famous books of hadith, right? The scholars refer to these as the 6 books of hadith, right? So you mentioned a bunch of them. You mentioned Bukhari. What else?
Abu Dawud, Ibn Majah, Nisai,
and Nasa'i,
Tirmidhi.
At-Tirmidhi.
There's one more. Muslim.
And Muslim. Good, excellent, right? Now the scholars, you have many scholars that mention this, that the whole ummah, all of the Muslim scholars have agreed upon the fact that Bukhari and Muslim, that they are authentic books of hadith. Now you do have some scholars, of the past, like Ad-Darqutni and others, who've criticized like a handful of hadiths in Bukhari, for example, right? But the vast majority of the hadiths, like 99% of the hadiths in Bukhari and Muslim, they're all sahih. They're all authentic. Right? And of course you find that there are some people that try to put shubuhat in the minds of the Muslims, try to put doubts in the minds of the Muslims concerning these books, right? You have some people making YouTube videos talking about how Bukhari is it's a scandal and it's all weak and this and that. But if you ask, or if you even study this sign just a bit, you'll see the amount of work that Imam al-Bukhari put in his book. And you'll understand that every single hadith that we look at as sahih, it needs to have a chain of narration, right? If you guys ever study this, and it's very easy. I mean, there's a lot of material online that you can find so that you can study how the hadith sciences work. It's very interesting, and it's very, it's going to really contextualize a lot of the things that you're going to hear. So, for example, when you hear that a hadith is sahih, right, then you can kind of assume why. When you hear that a hadith is da'if, and you hear that a scholar says that there's somebody in the chain of narration that's a weak narrator, then you understand that. Right? And there's a very interesting hadith in the Sunnah of Abu Dawud. The Prophet ﷺ, he foretells the way that the system of hadith will work. Right? There's a hadith where he says to the Sahaba how the system of hadith will work. The Prophet ﷺ, he said to the Sahaba that tasma'un, that you will hear from me. وَيُسْمَعُ مِنْكُمْ, and it will be heard from you. وَيُسْمَعُ مِمَّنْ سَمِعَ مِنْكُمْ, and it will be heard from those who have heard from you. Just think about that for a second, right? He foretold the fact that people will narrate his statements. and it's going to be passed on generation after generation. And that's how we have the hadiths. Like another point to understand as well is that those who reject the hadith tradition, they must reject the Quran as well. Because generally speaking, the Quran has been transmitted to us the same way that the hadiths have been transmitted to us as well. Right? Anyone who has memorized the Quran and they've learned from a teacher, and they want to pass that Quran down to the next generation, they have a chain of narration. Right? They have a chain of narration that goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, that goes back to Jibreel, that goes back to Allah Azza wa Jal. So we have to understand that in terms of transmission, the way that the Quran has been transmitted to us is very similar to how all of these hadiths have been transmitted to us as well. Now, and generally speaking, it's the same people as well. Of course, you had some of the Quran reciters in the past, some of the famous Quran reciters that would be considered weak by some hadith scholars because they're not hadith specialists. Right? But generally speaking, the method is the same. Right? It's an oral tradition that's been passed down generation after generation. And we have the names of all of these people that have narrated the Quran to us. Right? In my chain of narration from the Quran, I have all of the names of the people. I know who my teacher learned from. I know who he learned from, all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. Right? So, we have this tradition that's been preserved, and you can't find any other tradition that's been preserved like this. You ask a Christian, right, where did he get his Bible from? They found some manuscript in some cave. Right? Which version is actually the authentic one? They have no idea. Right? You have some verses in the New Testament that some Bible scholars have said that they're fabrications. Right? So they have no way of tracing their tradition back to Jesus, Eesa alayhi salam. But we do as Muslims, right? We can trace back our hadith to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So for somebody to say that, we're going to reject the whole tradition of hadith totally, this is madness. Right, this is madness. Anybody who studied the hadith tradition just a bit, the sciences of a hadith just a bit, will understand how much work actually went into this. Right? How much work actually went into this. Now, when it comes to following the Prophet ﷺ, I want to give you some real life examples of the Sahaba. Because we can understand that, we have to follow the Prophet ﷺ, but what does that actually practically mean? Right? So I want to give you some examples from the time of the Sahaba. Now, there's a narration in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, عن مجاهد بإسناد جيد. It's narrated from Mujahid, who is from the Tabi'in, from the students of the Sahaba. He says, كنا مع ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما في سفر بمكان فحاد عنهم. He says, Mujahid, that we were with Abdullah ibn Umar, who is a Sahabi. He's a companion. He said that we were with Abdullah ibn Umar on a journey, and we went to a particular place, and Abdullah ibn Umar, he moved away from this place. Right? They settled in a place, and Abdullah ibn Umar out of nowhere just moves away from the place where everybody they're sitting in this particular place. So Mujahid, he says, فَسُئِلَ لِمَ فَعَلْتَ ذَلِكَ. Right? He said that Abdullah ibn Umar was asked, why did you move from where everybody was? Right? Why did you move from that place? Abdullah ibn Umar, he says, رَأَيْتُ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ فَعَلَ هَذَا فَفَعَلْتُ. He said that I saw Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam do the same thing in the same place, so I did it. So even like the habits of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you would find that the Sahaba would follow that like to the T. Like they would try to emulate him in almost everything. The way that he spoke, the way that he dressed, the places that he would sit, the things that he would do, almost everything they tried to follow him in that. And another really cool example of this is when Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, he says that and this hadith is in Bukhari. Anas, he says that one time the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was invited by a tailor to eat some food. So Anas, he said that I went with the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought Anas along, and Anas was a young servant of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that we entered the man's house, and the food that the man had, it was like some meat that was cut up, and it was some like pumpkin. It was either pumpkin or squash or one of those gourds, right? So Anas radiallahu anhu, he said that how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he noticed that he would like to eat that pumpkin or squash or whatever it was, right? So Anas radiallahu anhu, he said that how, and he mentioned that he didn't really like that. But after he saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam liking that type of food, he said that after that I continued to love this same type of food. Can you imagine that? Like you don't have to love pumpkin. You don't have to love squash. Like, listen, I don't know if it's exactly pumpkin, but it's one of those types of like, I don't know if it's a vegetable or fruit. Is pumpkin a vegetable or a fruit? I think there's some ikhtilaf on this. No, seriously. I think from botanical, from There's some ikhtilaf on this. I know for sure that from a certain perspective it's a fruit. From a certain perspective it's not. I'm pretty sure. But Allahu A'lam, Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best, right? The scholars have different opinions. But anyhow, so whether it was a squash, whether it was a pumpkin or zucchini or any of this type of vegetable / fruit, Anas radiallahu anhu, he said that I continue to love this for the rest of my life, right? So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came, right, like he changed the things that they loved. They would just love things because he loved it. And one of the brothers here in Nashik, we were talking about this, that how like before practicing, I mean personally me, I never had any plans of growing my beard, right? I didn't really like it. I mean, come on, like nowadays maybe it's a bit fashionable now, right? You have a lot of people, the hipsters and things like that. They're growing out their beards, right? A lot of celebrities are growing out their beards and things like that. So a lot of people, they're gonna grow out their beards because it's just the trend now, right? But back in the days, it wasn't really the trend. You would look like really weird if you have like a big beard out of nowhere, right? Like why are you growing out your beard like that? So personally, me, like before I started practicing Islam, I mean, I didn't have a beard before I started practicing Islam. My beard grew very recently, alhamdulillah. But I always had it in my head that I'm just gonna trim it or I'm just gonna shave it as a young kid, right? I never had this plan of growing it out. But to be honest, now like I like it. You know what I'm saying? I like it, and I hope that that I'm just like the Sahaba, and we should all hope that we're like this as well. And I'm pretty sure that all of us, you can give some example of something that you love because you're a Muslim. Whereas before you were practicing Islam, you didn't really like it, right? So, as a believer, when you practice, Islam, there are certain things that are gonna change naturally. If you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you love the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, you're gonna love to be like him, right? You're gonna love to act like him, to speak like him. His ways gonna become the most beloved thing to you. And that's why, there was one mushrik, Thumama ibn Uthal, radiallahu anhu, he accepted Islam. And, what happened to him is that he was responsible for some of the deaths of some of the Sahaba. And the Prophet ﷺ, he had this guy tied up in the masjid. So for like 3 days straight, this man was tied up in the masjid. And Thumama, he said to the Prophet ﷺ, he said that if you free me, then I'm going to be very grateful. So after like 3 days, the Prophet ﷺ, he frees Thumama. Now obviously being in the masjid, you're going to be seeing salah, you're going to be seeing the Muslims, how nice they are and how together they are. Thumama, at the end of the 3 days, when the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba to cut him loose, he took his shahada. Right? He says, "O Messenger of Allah, I want to accept Islam." The Prophet ﷺ told him to go make ghusl. He came back and he said to the Prophet ﷺ, he said that there was no face more hateful to me than your face. That there was no religion more hateful to me than your religion and your way of life, and now it has become the most beloved thing to me. Right? So you find that there are many people, like Umar was on his way to kill the Prophet ﷺ. But then after that, like he would literally defend the Prophet ﷺ in every situation. Right? So Islam is something that can completely transform somebody's life. I remember watching a video. It was this brother, he's like a chaplain at a prison. And he was showing like the video, they had like a little halaqah going on in the prison. And they had this big, gigantic guy. He was like a huge guy. And then all of a sudden, the brother, he mentioned like a reminder, and then all of a sudden that big guy, he starts crying. Like when you look at that brother, you think that like he's like a huge, tough, like a big tough guy. Like he's not gonna cry. But he mentioned like a hadith or something about Allah, and the brother started crying. So the chaplain, the brother, he was saying that how people like this, perhaps before Islam they were criminals, they were so harsh, but Islam like softened their heart, right? Islam softened their hearts. You have many other examples of this with the Sahaba. For example, Umar radiallahu anhum. When it came to the time of Tawaf, Umar radiallahu anhu, he went and he kissed the black stone. And Umar radiallahu anhu, he says that I know that you don't harm and you don't benefit. You're just a stone. And if it wasn't for me seeing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam kiss you, I would not have done so. So the only reason why he did so was because he saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam do so. And that shows the amount of love that he had. Another example of this is during Salah, when the Prophet ﷺ was leading the Sahaba in Salah, the Prophet ﷺ all of a sudden took off his shoes. Right? He took off his shoes in the middle of the Salah. Now all of the Sahaba who were wearing their shoes, they all took off their shoes. So the Prophet ﷺ, he noticed that they all took off their shoes. So after the Salah, he asked them, he's like, "Why did you guys take off your shoes?" They said, "Because we saw you take off your shoes." Right? I mean, that's it. Whatever you do, we follow. So the Prophet ﷺ told them that Jibreel came to me right? That Jibreel came to me and Jibreel told me that there was something that was unclean, something that was filthy on my shoes, so I removed it. Because when you're praying, you should be praying with clean clothes and clean shoes, right? So the Prophet ﷺ wanted to be in a clean state, so he removed those shoes. But just because of the Sahaba, just because of their love of him ﷺ, they removed their shoes without even understanding why, right? So as a believer, many of the scholars they mentioned that the purest form of submission, the actuality of submission is to submit, even if your aql doesn't understand the reason as to why you should, right? And many people, they may say that this is actually unintellectual. This is actually like stupidity or something. They may say, why would you follow something if you don't even understand why? And we have to realize that if you understand that Allah Azza wa Jal is God and He knows everything, then whether you understand the wisdom of what He's telling you to do or not, there definitely is a wisdom. Right? If you understand that Allah Azza wa Jalla is Al-Hakim, the all-wise, everything He tells you to do has wisdom. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't tell you the wisdom. But does that mean that if He doesn't tell you the wisdom, that there is no wisdom? Or does it mean that if you can't understand the wisdom, that there is no wisdom? Absolutely not. If you've already established a premise that He is Al-Hakim, He's the all-wise, then that should solve every problem after that of whether or not His commandments have wisdom or not. Right? So, for example, when it comes to music now, I was talking to a brother, very recently. He was saying, what's so bad about music? Right? What's so bad about music? And listen, we're not going to talk about music right now. But the vast majority of scholars, there's almost ijma' on this. There's very few scholars that have allowed music. The vast majority of scholars have deemed music in general as haram. Right? And listen, we're not going to get into that, into those details right now. I want to give you another example. After the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, this hadith is in the Sunan of Ibn Majah. It's an authentic hadith. It was narrated by Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu that he said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. Right, pay very close attention to this hadith. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, "لا تمنعوا إماء الله أن يصلين في المسجد." The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told the men from the Sahaba, do not forbid the female slaves of Allah from praying in the masjid. Right? If there's a woman, she wants to come to the masjid, she wants to benefit from the reminders, she wants to pray, don't stop them from coming to the masjid. So the son of Abdullah ibn Umar, he said that we're going to stop them. We're going to stop them. So Ibn Umar, he got furious. He says that I tell you that the Prophet ﷺ said something and you're going to say that we're going to stop them? Right? So he actually made inkar of his son because of what he said. Right? He actually got upset at him because he actually wanted to deliberately go against the Prophet ﷺ. And there's many other examples of this, but there's really one, inshallah ta'ala, we can finish with this example. Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, this hadith is in Bukhari. That there was a time where the Sahaba would drink alcohol. Right? They would drink alcohol. Now there's a hadith in Bukhari where Anas radiallahu anhu, he said that I was serving, right? كنت أسقي أبا عبيدة وأبا طلحة وأبي بن كعب من فضيخ زهو وتمر. Anas radiallahu anhu, he said that I was serving Abu Talha and Abu Ubaidah and Ubay ibn Ka'b. These are three of the most notable of the Sahaba. He said I was serving them alcohol. He was literally their bartender. He was serving them alcohol, right? They were actually drinking alcohol like Anas was just pouring them some shots. And they were going to drink it, right? They were going to drink it. Because we have to understand, like nowadays, these are the terminologies that we use. Somebody might say like, oh my God. I mean, listen, a glass of alcohol nowadays, people refer to it as a shot. So they would actually drink alcohol because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not make it haram at that time. So Anas said that I would pour them some of this alcohol. And Anas radiallahu anhu, he said that all of a sudden somebody came and somebody told us that inna al-khamra qad hurrimat. That at this time it has been revealed that khamr, that alcohol has been deemed haram. The verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made alcohol haram came down. So Anas radiallahu anhu, he said that how the Sahaba around him, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Abu Talha, Abu Ubaidah, that they all stopped drinking. They all stopped drinking instantly. And even Abu Talha told Anas, he said, oh Anas, just pour it out, just get rid of it. And some of the narrations mentioned that the streets of Medina, that they were flowing with alcohol. People were just throwing the alcohol out. Nobody wanted to have it. It became something that was hateful to them now. Right? When they realized that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was not pleased with it. Now, my last point now is that when it comes to obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, we have to understand that following the Quran and the Sunnah, the straight path, like following the Quran and Sunnah is something that we all as Muslims have to accept. And for the most part, I think that we do. Now, what you find that the Muslims differ about is the interpretation of that. You find that there are people doing different practices and doing many different things, and they're using the same verse to prove what they're doing, right? Let me give you one example, right? There's one example from the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ إِذْ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ جَاءُوكَ فَاسْتَغْفَرُوا اللَّهَ وَاسْتَغْفَرَ لَهُمُ الرَّسُولُ لَوَجَدُوا اللَّهَ تَوَّابًا رَحِيمًا. Allah, He says, and this is from Surah An-Nisa, Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says, and if only that when they have wronged themselves, right, they came to you, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and they sought Allah's forgiveness, and the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam sought forgiveness for them as well. If they did this, they would have found Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as forgiving and merciful. A lot of people say that, you know what? This verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that the believers should go to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam and he should seek forgiveness for them. So what you find is a lot of people, a lot of Muslims nowadays, what they do is that they make dua to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They say, Ya Nabiyyana Muhammad, oh our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, istaghfir lana, ask Allah to forgive us. And they use this verse as proof. The verse is saying that the believers should go to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and have him ask for their forgiveness. So now the question is, did any of the Sahaba understand this verse in that light? Right? Did any of the Sahaba, did any of the Tabi'in, did any of the Muslims after that, did they ever make dua to the Prophet ﷺ like this? Not one of them. Not one of them. So it's not enough to just say, oh, I'm following the Quran and Sunnah, but it's about the interpretation of that as well. Right? That there are some people, what they do, right, is that they put pebbles and rocks underneath their foreheads when they want to pray. Right? And they, and some of them, they may use the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he says that جُعِلَتْ لِيَ الْأَرْضُ مَسْجِدًا وَطَهُورًا, that this earth has been made as a masjid. It's been made as a place of worship for me. So the earth has been made as a place of worship, as a masjid. So they say that wherever you go, you must take a piece of the earth to put it under your forehead because that's a place of sujood. They're using a hadith. Right? You may ask, brother, where are you getting this from? He's going to bring you a hadith. He's going to be like, it's from Sahih Bukhari, brother. What are you going to do after that? Right? The next question is to ask him, where are you getting this interpretation? Right? Who from among the Sahaba, from the early Muslims, understood this hadith the way that you're understanding it? A lot of Muslims, what they do nowadays, they go to the bookshelf of the masjid, they pull out Sahih Bukhari, and now they're deriving things. And this is why you got nuts today. You got crazy people who are blowing things up, who are killing people and causing a lot of violence. Is because it is stupidity. They don't understand how to actually understand the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we must realize that our interpretation, right, our Islam that we have to follow, it's not just any interpretation that you want. Because if you say that everybody has the right to interpret the book of Allah and the sunnah in whatever way that they want, then you're validating the interpretation of extremists. That's what you're doing. Because if you say that somebody can interpret the Quran in a way that suits them, then that's exactly what they're doing. Right? So we have to understand that it's not enough to just say that you follow the Quran and Sunnah, but according to whose interpretation? Right? According to whose interpretation? So you have many different deviant beliefs, deviant ideas that come about from not understanding the Quran properly and not understanding the Sunnah properly. So whose interpretation should we follow? There's a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he says that the best of mankind is my generation, then those who follow them, then those who follow them. The scholars refer to these early generations as the Salaf, or as the early Muslims. We have to understand that our Islam, if they did not practice Islam in the way that we're practicing Islam, then there's some problem. Because if they learned directly from the Prophet ﷺ and we're doing something completely different from what they did, then you know that there's a problem there. Right, that there's a problem there. And I'm going to give you just a couple quotations from some of the Sahaba. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he says that كُلُّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ وَإِنْ رَآهَا النَّاسُ حَسَنًا. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he says that every innovation in the religion, right, every religious innovation is something that is a bid'ah. Right, it's something that is a bid'ah. And he says that, and it's misguidance even if the people think that it's good. right? Even if the people think that it's good. Somebody's, like somebody says that, hey, I want to pray 5 rak'at for Salatul Isha. It doesn't work like that. You may think that it's nice. MashaAllah, I'm praying more, right? But it doesn't work like that. You need to follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam according to the understanding of those early Muslims. And then you have Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. He says that ittabi'u wa la tabtadi'u faqad kufitum. He says that follow and do not innovate because you have been sufficed. Right? You've been sufficed. Whatever you need has already been explained to you. You have Ibn Mas'ud and Abu Darda radiallahu anhuma. These are from the Sahaba. They made a statement. They said that al-iqtisadu fi sunnah khayrun min al-ijtihadi fil bid'ah. They said that to do a little bit of the sunnah is better than working hard in bid'ah. Because you don't get any reward for that. Right? You don't get any reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for doing that. So doing a little bit of the practices of the sunnah is much better. And you have Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala. He says that لن يصلح آخر هذه الأمة إلا ما صلح به أولها. Imam Malik, the great jurist, the great scholar of our tradition, he said that nothing will rectify the later time of this ummah except what rectified the early part of this ummah. So whatever changed them as a society, that's the only thing that's going to change us, nothing else. Right, nothing else. So what we need to do as Muslims is find out how they practice Islam. Make that our standard. Right, make that our standard. Not just some random guy who's making a YouTube video with a bookshelf behind him and he's like 15 years old and he's explaining some hadith based on his own desires. No. That's not the standard that we follow. Right? And I mean, listen, this is not to put anybody down who's 15 and he has a bookshelf behind them, right? But it's the content. It's the content. It doesn't matter what your age is, what your gender is. It's about the substance of what you're teaching, right? What you're calling to. That's what's important, right? So we need to, use those early Muslims, their understanding, especially when it comes to aqeedah, when it comes to the attributes of Allah and many different topics. They have to be our standard. Now, does anybody here have any questions, anything that they want to add? Yeah, brother. Wa alaikum salam. Just wait for the mic. Who has the mic? Let's hear. So everyone can hear, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Why is the purpose of publishing or saying weak hadiths?
Okay, what's the purpose? Okay, very good question. Why do some scholars even include weak hadiths in their collections? For example, we said that the most authentic books of hadith from the 6 books are what? Bukhari and Muslim. But then you have Abu Dawud, At-Tirmidhi, An-Nasai, and Ibn Majah. Those are the other 4 of the 6. And then what are some other books of hadith that we have? Yeah, the Muwatta of Imam Malik. What else? The Musnad of Imam Ahmad, right, which is huge, which is probably the biggest out of all of them that we're going to mention tonight. What else? Abu Dawud, we've mentioned that, right? We got Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Nasa'i, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Muwatta of Malik, the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. What else? 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi. What else? Riyadh al-Salihin. Right, okay, anyhow, definitely you've heard of many, the Mustadrak of Imam al-Hakim, the Sahih of Ibn Hibban. You have, and many other books of hadith. There are literally dozens, of books of hadiths. Now, what you find is that the majority of the hadith collections, they include in there sometimes deliberately weak hadiths. And the scholars have many reasons as to why they do that. Right? The first reason why they do that is to clarify that it's weak. Some scholars, what they do is that they would put a weak hadith in their compilation and then clarify the fact that it is da'if. Right? Another reason is that sometimes the hadith may be da'if, but the Muslims have ijma'. They have consensus that the hadith is to be acted upon. Right? So for example, I don't want to give. Okay, I'll give one example. There's this hadith in the Sunan of Ibn Majah, narrated by Abu Umama radiallahu anhu. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that إن الماء لا ينجسه شيء إلا ما غلب على ريحه وطعمه ولونه. There's a hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's reported to have said that water remains pure unless it is changed by something that is impure in its taste, color, and smell. This hadith right here, Imam Abu Hatim mentions that it's a da'if hadith. Imam An-Nawawi mentions that that ittafaq al-muhaddithun ala tad'if, that all of the muhaddithun have ijma' that this hadith is da'if. So you have, for example, Ibn Hajar mentions this in the beginning of Bulugh al-Maram. Why does he mention this? Sometimes it's to show you that although the isnad of this hadith is da'if, many scholars like Ash-Shafi'i, Ibn Abd al-Barr, many scholars have mentioned that there's ijma' on this point, on this concept, that water is to remain pure unless it's changed by something that is impure in its taste, color, and smell. This is just one example. If you're not familiar with this example, there are many other examples of this. But for example, you have issues where the Sahaba just agreed upon. They agreed upon certain things. And when the Sahaba or the Muslims agree upon something, then that's a proof in Islam by itself. You have the Quran, the Sunnah, and the consensus of the Muslims. There's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he says that لا تجتمع أمتي على ضلالة, that my ummah will never agree upon misguidance. So anytime the Muslims that they have agreed upon something, then many of the usuliyin, the scholars of usul, they consider that as a proof in Islam as well. Alright, so sometimes you may have a hadith, its chain of narration is da'if, but the meaning can be accepted. Right? Sometimes you find that scholars, they use a hadith that has a particular wording, and they use it as like additional proof or additional evidence. Right? For example, you have many books of hadith. For example, they would list the most authentic hadiths, and then after that they would show what has been narrated as well. Right? So these are just a couple of the reasons why they would do that. But the scholars even have some difference of opinion. Can you act upon a weak hadith? Some scholars, they have some conditions, and they mention that it will be permissible to act upon a weak hadith with certain conditions, right? But that's in brief. Hopefully that answers your question. Any other questions? Comments? It doesn't have to be a question, something that you guys want to add, something that you want to discuss, briefly. No khutbahs. Yeah. Yeah, you want to mention something? Yeah, bismillah. No? Oh, once, yeah.
When it comes to different opinions,
Yeah.
between scholars, how do we deal with this issue?
Okay, how do you deal with different opinions? Okay, we can have a whole session on that, just talking about that. But what you should do is that try to find a scholar that you respect in terms of their knowledge, in terms of their experience. You feel that somebody is a faqih, that he's a muhaddith, that he knows what he's talking about, that he's qualified. So you find one of those scholars that are living today, and you can ask them a question. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ ذِكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. That ask the people of dhikr, ask the people of knowledge, of remembrance, if you don't know. If you don't have any knowledge, ask somebody who knows. So if you ask somebody who knows and they give you a satisfactory answer, even though it may be an issue of different opinions, you have to choose an opinion to act upon, right? Especially if, like, for example, if you want to make a decision, one scholar says it's wajib, for example, another scholar says that it's haram, for example. I can't think of an example like that, but perhaps you may need to make a decision there, right? So sometimes you're going to have to find a view to act upon. So what you do is you find a scholar that you trust, that you you feel comfortable with their knowledge, that you trust that they have studied this issue, especially if they give you the proof, alhamdulillah, and then you act upon what they have given you, their fatwa, and we have to realize that issues of difference of opinion, we should not be hardcore in these issues, right? You should be very tolerant and very lenient. The Sahaba were as well. Many people think that it's only Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, and Ahmad that differed. No, a lot of these scholars, they trace their ikhtilaf back to the Sahaba, right? And there are certain views of the Sahaba that if I tell you that they held, these views, you'll be amazed. You'll be amazed. How could this Sahabi said that this is halal? Everybody knows that's haram, right? You have many examples like this. I don't want to mention any examples right now, but if you study the books of comparative fiqh, these books, you'll see many examples of this. So when it comes to issues of difference of opinion, we should be very lenient and tolerant towards each other. Now, how I practice, you should be searching for the truth, right? If you are looking around from fatwa to fatwa, and the only reason why you keep looking is that you want to find something that suits with a preconceived notion that you have already, then that's a problem, right? You should be sincerely looking for the truth. And that's why you find that there are many scholars that they hold a particular view, and it's even more harder for yourself in terms of your practice if you hold this view. Some scholars, they say that this is haram, and if you hold that view that it's haram, you're going to be limiting yourself, right? But you have to really look at it objectively, strip your emotions away. Is this view the more authentic view, in my opinion, right? Does it make more sense to me, logically, right? Not through your emotions, not through what you feel or your background, but actually look at it from an objective standpoint, right? Is it more authentic? Is a hadith more authentic? Does a hadith prove this point even more? And then follow that view, right? Yeah.
Oh, no, it's on. Okay. Just I have one question, especially, you mentioned about, nowadays everyone has their very different interpretation of Islam. Like you mentioned, some people, they say they reject hadith, some people reject Quran, some people reject Sunnah in general. But when it comes to, let's say, like certain issues, right? What I feel that Islam is very flexible depending on your situation, and sometimes, these opinions, when we stick to one madhab, we become very, it's not to say that, they're wrong, but we become very narrow-minded in the sense that we're not have any leverage for movement. But I do think that one of the important things, especially, like you said, when it comes to, if you have a question, you should ask someone who's knowledgeable, because, now a lot of days, a lot of people, they have no interpretation because of what the internet is giving them.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say that, some of the articles are wrong, but there's some articles where I feel like it's been in a different country and it doesn't apply to like the culture or how, how it works over here. And I'll give an example, and I'm not trying to start any political issue, but like Islam Q&A, like there are some things that, with Islam Q&A, I can understand, like when it's like certain hard and fast rules like wudu and whatnot. But also when it comes to like certain issues, I could tell that, they're very like into very like one madhab strictly, and I don't see any like thing where it's like, okay, is there something more to it than just that? So I think like the best thing I would first recommend everyone is always like go to the local sheikh and kind of like, someone who you can trust to first, clarify these issues. Because I feel like you need to understand there's a broader term than just kind of like sticking to it that, oh, this is haram because it's haram, but then you want to know why. Well, another thing I want to ask is that what do you feel about is, what is your opinion on people who kind of follow, let's say there's like one issue, right? And there's maybe like 4 or 5 different opinions, and someone decides to maybe take like, he'll choose this opinion, but maybe a situation didn't work out for him, so he chooses like another opinion of the same issue. Do you think that's kind of wrong, or that's something that shouldn't be done, or should it just be if you stick with one opinion, it should be that opinion?
Okay, so the thing is, when they're looking at different opinions, if they're actually studying the particular issue and they have the tools required to study the particular issue, and not everybody does, but if you're a student of knowledge, you're looking at a particular issue, then you should have your standard as to what you consider to be, to be authentic. That should be consistent. Right, that should be consistent. Like it shouldn't be your desires, your feelings, your emotions, right? You should try to be as objective as possible. And objective means that you're being impartial. You're not being biased. You're not choosing something just because it's easier for you. Like that's not what it will. That's not what it's about, right? It's about trying to follow something that you feel is truthful, right? That you're being honest and you're being unbiased. So if somebody, almost every single scholar has changed their views. Imam Shafi'i changed a ton of his views. Ibn Taymiyyah changed a ton of his views. Like you read some of Ibn Taymiyyah's books, you find that the books that he wrote earlier on have different views as to the views that were presented in his later works. You have many scholars, like for example, like that there are certain, like for example, Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen, right? There are certain views that he would mention in every single one of his books, but before he died, he changed certain views of his, and you would not find it in any of his books. You would only find it from what his students have said, because it just hasn't been something that he's written. He didn't write any book after he changed his view, but all of his previous books, they all present a certain view that he once had. But before he died, right before he died, he would change certain views that he would have. And sometimes you would find that there would be handwritten letters by him, and he would say that this is the view that I'm following now. And he died, at a very old age. So you find that there are many scholars that they change their views, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that shows that a person, if you're doing it for the right reasons, you're doing it objectively and honestly, and you're actually trying to follow the truth, and the evidence, and that's what we all should be doing. If you're doing that, then obviously there's nothing wrong with following another opinion. It doesn't mean that somebody's being wishy-washy. No, this is the way of the scholars, of the past, that when they had a particular view, when they found new evidence for another view, then they would accept that view. That's part of a healthy learning, right? And following the truth, right? So there's nothing wrong with that, providing that the person is doing it for the right reasons. Exactly, right? As long as you're not just following your desires, right? Maybe we'll take one more comment or question. Yeah, Nashik.
So there's a certain kind of hadith. I think it's a hadith, but it's a hadith Qudsi. Could you explain what it is? It's still foreign to me. I just know it has something to do with the word of Allah, but
okay.
Yeah.
So the hadith Qudsi is a hadith narrated by the Prophet ﷺ in which he narrates from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly. Right? Whereas the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ, even though the Quran is a speech of Allah Azza wa Jal as well, but the Quran is something that's been, the Prophet ﷺ, he learned it from Jibreel. Right, who then, like Jibreel took it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then taught it to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But a hadith Qudsi is a hadith where the Prophet sallallahu, he relays a statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly. Now, is a hadith Qudsi referred to as Quran? It's not. It's not part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's book. But just because it is not part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's book that He's revealed doesn't mean that it's not part of the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as scholars have difference of opinion, is the hadith Qudsi the actual wording of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is it just the meaning? And scholars, they have both, evidences on both sides for, with this particular issue. But there's many different reasons. There's many differences between the hadith Qudsi and the Quran. One of the differences is that sometimes you find that there are da'if hadith Qudsis and there are authentic hadith Qudsis. Right? So sometimes scholars may have difference of opinion as to whether the hadith Qudsi is an authentic hadith or not. It's just like a hadith, but it's just that the Prophet ﷺ is quoting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly. Right? Another difference between hadith Qudsi and the Quran is that the Quran has a particular reward for reciting it. You get 10 rewards for each and every single letter. But that's not the same for hadith Qudsi. And then you have the issue of narrating. For example, the Prophet is narrating the hadith Qudsi directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereas the Quran is going through Jibreel alayhi salam. Right? So those are just three main differences between the hadith Qudsi and the Quran. But we look at both as generally being from the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, like I said, some scholars have difference of opinion as to whether or not the hadith Qudsi is Allah's speech in meaning or actual wording, like Allah actually said those words. But they are attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Hopefully that answers the question. Awesome. So, yeah.
Going back to the madhab discussion, I just want to ask, because from my understanding, maybe a misunderstanding, I thought a majority of scholars follow strictly one school of thought, or would learn strictly one school of thought and would teach that school.
Okay, listen, there's nothing wrong with following a madhab. If you want to follow a madhab, go ahead. You have the green light to do so. Scholars have been doing so for over 1,000 years. You have scholars who have even written books against those who choose not to follow a madhab as well. To follow a madhab, there's nothing wrong with that. And we have to understand that what exactly is a madhab. A madhab is based on certain principles. You have to understand that Abu Hanifa had certain principles that forced him to have certain views because of those principles that he had. Imam Malik had certain principles. So because of the principles of these different scholars, that led them to different rulings that they would conclude from the research. If somebody wants to follow a madhab, no problem. But what becomes problematic is that if you're doing your research, following a madhab, and you're a student of knowledge, and something becomes clear to you that this view does not make sense of my madhab, it doesn't add up, that you find that there's another view that makes much more sense from an objective standpoint, then it'll be wrong to just follow that just because it's the madhab. Right? Your allegiance, your standard of what is truth or what is truthful is not based on what this person said and what that person said. Right? Remember, we've mentioned an ample amount of evidences that are sources for the truth as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The different madhabs are just human attempts to deciphering or understanding what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends with the same like verses of the Quran that all of the madhabs use. Sometimes you have some scholars, they have two different rulings from the same hadith. They use the same hadith and they come up with two completely different conclusions. right? So a madhab, they have certain principles of each and every single madhab. So Abu Hanifa had certain principles that would lead him to whatever views he had. So if somebody, and it doesn't matter if somebody wants to say that they don't want to follow a madhab. If you say that you don't follow a madhab, you're gonna be following a madhab. Because you're going to be following some speaker, some sheikh that's following certain principles, right? So there's no way to go around it. You're going to have to follow certain principles. Now, if you can study and go through a madhab and come to a level where you don't want to limit yourself to that madhab, then okay, no problem, right? There are many scholars that have done that. Look at, for example, Ibn Taymiyyah. He was brought up as a Hanbali, but then you find that there's so many rulings where he went against the Hanbali madhab. Many scholars like this. So there's nothing wrong with that. But like I said, if you want to be organized, then follow a madhab, no problem. Because it makes things very easy for you. It makes things very easy for you, spelled out for you. And if you want to study and something else becomes clear, then obviously you follow that, right? So it's not as if you must follow a madhab or it's haram to follow a madhab. There's a balance, right? There's a balance. You can follow a madhab, but don't be, like hardcore in it where you can't even move away from the madhab. Because I'm telling you, there's certain views of the madhab. If I tell you if I tell you certain views that the four madhabs had, you'd be like, what? How could scholars have had that particular view, right? But through your research, you'll see these things. Right? And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. So we'll stop here, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله